Hey there, hunters. Caius Whitefang, pack leader of Scourge Alliance here, and today I wanted to talk about racial passives. In particular, we're going to be looking at the damage you can get from racial passives. Hopefully, the information I give you here today will give you the insight into choosing the right race for your build that you're trying to come up with, whether it's a PvP build or a PvE build. So for the comparisons, I've used the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer has the highest damage output in the game, so we're going to see what our top tier damage can do. As far as the abilities that I've been comparing, I went ahead and I'm comparing the bleed damage of the Berserker and the Howl of Agony on the Werewolf skill line. So all these numbers are pulled while we're in Werewolf form, and all these numbers on the build that I'm using is 5,677 weapon damage and nearly 40,000 stamina. So why are those numbers important? The higher that you build your weapon damage and the higher that you build your stamina, it makes it the difference between the races smaller and smaller. If you have a lower weapon damage and a lower stamina pool, the choice in race will matter more for your damage output. So let's start her off. The Orc will have the highest amount of damage. Followed by that, you have the Dunmer, which will achieve very close to the Orc, but since it has slightly less stamina, it's going to be coming in at a decrease of damage of 0.19%. So between parses of an Orc and a Dunmer or a Dark Elf, your damage is going to be very similar. But the Orc still has the edge over the Dunmer. Following the Dunmer and down the line, you have a couple of races that follow up. You have Imperial, you have Red Guard, and you have Wood Elf. Now, all of those have the same amount of stamina that the Orc gains. They all gain 2,000 stamina. So you're actually missing out on the weapon damage that the Orc has. So this is going to mean your DPS is going to drop, or the total damage you're doing is going to drop by 3.76%. As I mentioned before, the lower that you get in that weapon damage and stamina pool, the more that the gap between these numbers will grow. So if you get higher stamina and higher weapon damage, the percentage between these races is going to matter less. One thing that I am leaving out of that calculation is the Wood Elf does gain extra penetration when it does a roll dodge. So if a Wood Elf has roll dodged, it has 6 seconds of gaining some penetration, and that's going to bring the difference in damage between the Orc and the Wood Elf down to a decrease of 1.51%. And following that, we have the Nord. The Nord is going to have a decrease in damage of 4.54% below the Orc. And the Khajiit will come in at 5.59% damage below the Orc. The one thing to note on the Khajiit, though, is they do gain extra crit damage. So at what point does that extra crit damage mean that it's going to overshadow and overpass these other classes? So at a 35% crit, your average damage is going to be higher than an Imperial, Red Guard, and Wood Elf, unless the Wood Elf has roll dodged. When you hit that 60% crit mark, that's when you're going to see your damage get very similar to an Orc. And you might see a 65% chance crit on a werewolf build that's in a raid with the proper buffs, but otherwise you're never going to get that high of crit. It's really when you get to 65% that you start to overpass the orc in terms of damage. Now you're saying, great, why don't I just use a Khajiit for trials and I'll have better DPS than an orc? Well, that may not necessarily be true, because while you do gain a little bit more damage through that bonus crit, the one thing that you lose out on is the fact that Warhorns and Minor Brutality are going to be more effective on an orc. So that's why an orc is still going to come ahead in trial DPS than a Khajiit. But it's a good thing to note that the Khajiit, overall, if you have a good amount of critical, its damage may be above the Imperial, the Red Guard, and the Wood Elf and the Nord. And the Magicka races in the game come out at 6.87% damage loss over the Orc. I hope that this information has been useful for you, and it comes in handy the next time that you're putting together a werewolf build or theorycrafting a werewolf build in the future. Until then, hunt well.